So glad to have you along. We are joined as always by Greg Engert, beer director for the Neighborhood Restaurant Group, a food and wine sommelier of the year. The group includes Rustico, 2 locations in Alexandria and Ballston, also Columbia Firehouse in Old Town. Good to see you. What's on tap this week?
So this week we have what I now consider a kind of classic international craft beer. It is the Beer Geek Breakfast from Mikkeller, which is of course, Mikkeller is Mikkel Borg Bjergso, a gypsy brewer who is from Copenhagen in Denmark. And this is the first beer that he ever brewed. And it's a really cool story how Mikkel kind of took Mikkeller to the level it is today. I mean, a pretty well-known import today, and to think that in 2005, 2006, he was completely unknown. So this story goes back to actually Mikkel and his brother, Jeppe, who we've spoken about before, because Jeppe has his own gypsy concern now called Evil Twin that's also making waves, and we've tasted some of his stuff. Of course, he makes great stuff. And we just had him here for a beer dinner in Birch and Barley, where we're talking right now. So in 2005, I think 2005, 2006, Jeppe Mikkeller, Mikkel's brother, twin brother, opened an amazing bottle shop for craft beer in Copenhagen called Old Butikken, or the Ale Boutique. And what's really crazy about this is he also was an importer, and still is. So he was kind of not only just collecting beers he could get, but he was going out finding them and bringing them in for his shop and then to distribute further afield. So he really had some and still has some amazing stuff on the shelves of this place. And so the story goes is that Mikkel was kind of the bigger homebrewer of the two at that time. They both had gotten into beer in the late 90s, started tasting groups. They both were actually school teachers. And in fact, Mikkel used to teach homebrewing to his students. Obviously, they have a little bit more restrained views of beer over there than we might here. And obviously, the drinking age is much younger. But he was teaching there, and so they were both teachers. And so Mikkel was also homebrewing. And they started selling his homebrew at the shop as well. And as luck would have it, a very important importer for craft beers into the United States, a guy named Dan Shelton, who runs Shelton Brothers Imports, tasted the beer and loved it, and sort of commissioned Mikkel to brew it for export to the States. And that's really where Mikkeller was somewhat born, producing this very beer. This was the beer that they served for the first time and that Dan tasted and wanted. And so then they shipped it into America, and the rest is kind of history, because Mikkel has made hundreds and hundreds of different beers in the last 5 years or so. It seems like every day there's a new Mikkeller beer on the market. They're all wonderful. And as a gypsy brewer, he in the past, he brewed his beers at lots of different breweries all over Europe. Now it's more concentrated at one brewery in Belgium called De Proef, which is wonderful. But this beer is still brewed at Nugneo in Norway. They're kind of a specialist of dark ales, and so it makes sense that this imperial stout brewed with oats and coffee would be brewed at Nugneo.
And we featured one of their beers too.
One of their beers as well.
I went to a beer dinner right here.
In Birch and Barley as well,
yeah,
that's right. Yeah. And actually I should mention that Mikkeller was the second beer dinner we ever did here at Birch and Barley. He came over from Denmark, and we hosted him here. We had a great dinner. It was the second one. The first one we ever did was with Garrett Oliver up at Brooklyn Brewery in 2010, shortly after we opened, and Mikkel was the second. So we've had a lot of great international craft brewers here.
Okay. And this is called?
Beer Geek Breakfast.
Could there be a better name? I don't know. That's inviting.
It's a nice fresh batch of this that just came over.
Now, I see his name, and this logo stands out in beer cases and in beer shelves, but I've never seen this beer or tried it before.
And that's what's so interesting about it, is like this was his kind of flagship, but see, a lot of new craft brewers, especially the gypsy brewers, don't really have flagships per se, because they're rotational and occasional. So just like new batches of new things coming out. And I think that it speaks to the promise of Mikkeller. So when you see Mikkeller, you're typically pretty sure that you're gonna like what he's brewed, or at least be interested in what he's brewed. And so it's funny that this is kind of his flagship, and yet you've probably had 10 or 15 others that aren't even this.
And last week we were talking about defining styles of beer. Which would this be defined as necessarily?
This is a sort of imperial stout, although I think it's only 7.5% alcohol. So only, I say, but I mean, a lot of imperial stouts are now 9, 10, 11, 12%. So it's kind of restrained. And the kicker here is that, and this is where the breakfast thing comes in a little bit, 25% of the grain bill here is oats, which means silk. Because when you think oats, oatmeal stouts, you think of silky textures, because that's what oats tends to provide for the beers, and that's why it has this great kind of creamy, almost velvety quality on the palate. And actually, if you talk to most brewers, they'll tell you that that's almost surprising, because oats are harder to brew with. They can kind of clog up your mash and things like that because they're rich and that silky texture comes through. So it's got that. It also, another breakfast theme, so it's oatmeal and coffee. It's got gourmet coffee added to it. In fact, I believe Mikkeller once told me that when he was first brewing this beer, they literally were just brewing pots of coffee and running over and dumping it into the beer. It's gotten much more, I guess, they probably changed up the recipe a little bit from that today, but it's kind of cool to know that that's how it all began.
Well, I have to admit, and fairly or unfairly, that I can be put off by seeing an oatmeal stout on a beer bottle, and this doesn't say that, but this is not. I mean, because I think, for whatever reason, I think dark and sludgy when I think oatmeal stout.
They're kind of like thick and rich.
Yes, but this is not at all.
No, it's not. It's creamy rather than sludgy, and still has. Sometimes oatmeal stouts can be on the sweeter side as well, and this one definitely has a nice balanced roast bitterness in the finish that's not overwhelming, and it's not too astringent. Sometimes when you add coffee to beer, particularly when it's not cold pressed, cold pressing will not bring out as much of the astringency. So cold pressed coffee works best, but when you don't do that, you can get a little bit too much astringency, and you don't have that here. It's really full-bodied and sippable as well.
Is it safe to make the wild assumption that this would be good with some breakfast items? I think it would be good with coffee cake.
It would.
Pancakes with bacon bits in it.
Pancakes, fried chicken and waffles, which we do here. It's amazing with that. Which is actually, it's fun, now that I mention it, we're actually opening a fried chicken and donuts place right nearby. That was unplanned, actually, how that happened. And one of the funny things is people say, we're going to have a great craft beer list there. It's called GBD, which stands for Golden Brown Delicious, which is a kitchen term for, like, if you want to make something perfect, you want it to be GBD. But we're going to have a great craft beer list there. People are like, well, what kind of craft beers are you going to have? And we are going to have, to your point about what it pairs with, a great selection always of dark, kind of roasty, rich, chocolatey beers that could pair just as well with a sweeter dessert or breakfast, pancakes, waffles, syrup, or donuts of all ilks, as well as with a more savory yet rich and kind of fatty fried chicken as well.
Yeah. Now, we mentioned his twin, Jeppe, who Evil Twin, Without You I'm Nothing, we featured a couple weeks ago.
Sour.
And I've started sending the brewers an email with the link to this video saying, hey, you're the beer of the week this week, thought you might want to see it. And I got a very nice email back from Jeppe.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, he's good.
That,
he's a great guy, and Mikkeller is as well.
If you have a question for Greg, here is the email to ask that question, beeroftheweek@WTOP.com. Greg, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Everyone, please always do drink responsibly, and be sure to bring your thirst next time for another Beer of the Week.